Park Lane just became a war zone. 110,000 people, 1 hour. Britain's richest street is now its most dangerous. This wasn't a protest. It was an explosion waiting to happen. And when it finally detonated, the damage was catastrophic. 122 civilians injured, 18 police officers fighting for their lives in critical care. And by the time the sun rose over London, £90 million in damage had been done across the city's most expensive mile. The sirens couldn't keep up. Emergency services were overwhelmed. And while the chaos unfolded, one question echoed through every street. How the hell did we get here? If you want the full story, the mainstream media won't tell you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to show you gets a lot darker. Park Lane didn't collapse overnight. This was weeks in the making. For over a month, 41 illegal encampments had spread across one of London's most iconic corridors. Tents crowding pavements, sleeping bags blocking bus stops, makeshift shelters appearing outside hotel entrances where rooms cost £2,000 a night. Tourists walked past cooking fires on marble sidewalks. Visitors from around the world stepped over belongings scattered across Britain's front door. And the authorities, they stood by and watched. The wealthy residents of Westminster started sounding alarms. Letters flooded the mayor's office. One described the scene as a professional tent city in full view of the world, with people drawing water from the Marble Arch fountains and cooking meals on pavements outside luxury boutiques. They demanded action, court orders, deportations, anything to restore order to a street that had become a symbol of the city's unravelling. But nothing happened until the incident that changed everything. A knife-wielding man from one of the camps charged at a group of tourists in broad daylight. Families scattered, children screamed, and police officers stood just metres away, unable or unwilling to intervene quickly enough. Someone captured the entire thing on video. Within 24 hours, that clip had 7.2 million views, and the reaction was instant. Hotels reported a 17% drop in occupancy overnight. Retail footfall on Park Lane and Oxford Street collapsed by 22%. Emergency notices went out to investors. Hundreds of bookings were cancelled. One-star reviews started flooding TripAdvisor, each one telling the same story. London isn't safe anymore. The economic damage is immediate, but the social damage, that was just beginning. Here's where the story takes a turn from bad to absolutely insane. While Park Lane descended into chaos, the government was busy tearing itself apart from the inside. 5 cabinet ministers were sacked in a single week. Senior advisors were purged. Leaks were being hunted down. And instead of focusing on knife attacks spreading across central London like wildfire, Number 10 spent its days silencing dissent and calculating who would survive the next reshuffle. Let me give you the numbers because they're staggering. In just 72 hours following the Park Lane incident, more than 150 knife-related incidents were reported across central London. 5 police officers were attacked while trying to contain the unrest. Over 600 emergency calls for police reinforcements came flooding in within 2 days, and almost all of them went unanswered. Why? Because the forces on the ground were completely overwhelmed, understaffed, under-resourced, and drowning in chaos they couldn't control. A memo circulated internally within the Home Office warning that public order was on the verge of total collapse. That memo sat on desks ignored for days. While politicians argued about optics and cabinet positions, the streets were burning. And then, in what might be the most tone-deaf moment in modern political history, the mayor decided to make a statement. Refugees have a great refugee week. As long as I'm here, London is open and you're welcome. Those words came at the worst possible moment. Just months earlier, a 15-year-old boy had been stabbed to death in central London. One victim in a wave of 107 recorded knife attacks during the mayor's tenure. And when that boy died, the mayor said nothing. But now, with Park Lane in flames and parents terrified to let their children walk to school, he chose this moment to celebrate. The backlash was volcanic. Parents wrote desperate letters asking if this was what London looked like now, whether their children's safety still mattered to anyone in power. One mother described how her child had to walk past the Park Lane encampment every morning on the way to school, past tents and shouting and the constant fear of violence. No response ever came. Residents of Westminster, some of the wealthiest neighbourhoods in Britain, started calling it what it was, leadership failure on a scale they'd never seen before. One local politician said publicly, "This isn't homelessness, this is a professional begging operation, a tent city operating in full view of the entire world, while our leaders pretend everything is fine." The trust was gone, and when trust disappears, chaos fills the vacuum. What happened next wasn't random, it was inevitable. When reporters tried to approach the camps to document conditions, violence erupted instantly, objects were thrown, crowds surged forward, cameramen were chased away. Inside the tents, residents told conflicting stories. Some claimed their shelters had been violently seized by authorities without warning, their belongings dumped onto the street, pushing them deeper into desperation and rage. Others described an organised network of people exploiting the situation, turning homelessness into a business model. The truth was messy, but the result was clear. London was fracturing. The chaos spread like a virus. Marble Arch went silent. Shops on Oxford Street pulled down their shutters and locked their doors. Entire districts slipped into what police internally referred to as no-go zones. Ambulances were blocked from entering certain areas. Emergency services reported delays of over an hour in response times. 14 hotels around Hyde Park rushed to hire private security after police admitted they simply didn't have the manpower to protect them. Guests demanded refunds. International bookings evaporated. And then the markets reacted. West End property values dropped 12% in a single night. The FTSE 100 fell 5%, erasing £20 billion in market value. Financial analysts started issuing warnings. If the unrest reached Canary Wharf, if it touched London's financial heart, global markets would feel the shockwave. But the most terrifying warning came from supply chain experts. If the protests spread to fuel depots or major ports, London's entire supply infrastructure could freeze within 48 hours. No goods moving in, no fuel moving out, a national standstill. A global capital was moving like a city without a pulse. The world was watching, and what they saw shocked them. International headlines called it the fall of London. Footage of the riots, the fires, the overwhelmed police lines passed 200 million views in just 2 days. From New York to Paris to Tokyo, governments asked the same question. How could a city this powerful, this wealthy, this established, unravel this fast? 2,000 police officers were deployed to central London. It still wasn't enough. Crowds pushed toward government buildings, barriers bent under the pressure. Officers formed human chains to protect Westminster. London burns trended worldwide aid. What had started as a local crisis on Park Lane was now an international symbol of Western decline. And the images were devastating. Smoke rising over landmarks tourists had visited for generations, looters running through streets where kings had once paraded. A city that had survived the Blitz now looked like it couldn't survive its own leadership. But while politicians argued and systems crumbled, one group stepped into the chaos without hesitation, and they were the last people anyone expected to be heroes. Street charities, volunteer organisations, outreach teams with no funding and no backup moved quietly through the camps, offering blankets, hot meals and housing referrals. They did the job the government had abandoned. Teams from St Mungo's and Crisis urged officials to stop focusing on forcibly removing people and start providing stable accommodation and long-term support. They warned that every violent clearance would just push people out during the day and pull them right back by nightfall. And they were absolutely right. Camps were cleared, then rebuilt, then cleared again. A vicious cycle with no destination and no plan. Just the appearance of action without any actual solution. In the most expensive square mile in all of Britain, the contrast became impossible to ignore. When the state, with all its power and resources, hesitated, the only people still doing the work were the ones with no power at all. It was volunteers with borrowed vans and donated sandwiches who kept people alive, not the government with its £1 billion budget. So here's the question. No one in power wants to answer, was this a riot or was it a reckoning? The damage is staggering. £90 million lost in a single night, 122 people injured, 18 officers in critical care, entire districts shut down, property values collapsed, international reputation shattered. But those are just numbers. The real damage goes deeper. Trust in leadership is gone. Trust in the police to protect citizens is gone. Trust in a system that's supposed to prevent things like this from happening is gone. For years, people watched as problems festered. They sent letters, they made calls, they voted, they waited for someone in power to act, and nothing happened. Until the pressure became so intense that the only release was violence. But as dawn broke over the wreckage of Park Lane, something unexpected emerged from the smoke. People who had been divided by politics, by class, by every artificial barrier society builds, suddenly stood together. Strangers helped each other dig through rubble. Neighbours who'd never spoken before shared food and water. Communities came together not because the government told them to, but because it was the only thing left to do. It was raw humanity in the ruins. Proof that even in the darkest moments, when institutions fail, people don't. But the question still hangs in the air, unanswered and haunting. How much longer can we ignore the cracks in the foundation? This wasn't just about Park Lane. It wasn't even just about London. This was about what happens when systems fail, leaders disappear, and people are abandoned to fend for themselves. It's about what happens when inequality becomes so visible that you literally can't walk down the street without seeing it. When £2,000 a night hotels sit next to desperate people sleeping in tents, and no one with power thinks that's a problem worth solving. London is broken. But the real question is, can it rebuild? Or has this city, this symbol of British resilience and strength, crossed a point of no return? The choices made in the coming days and weeks will determine everything. Whether London rises from these ashes or gets consumed by them. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or just another chapter in a long, slow decline. This wasn't just a riot, it was a warning. And if we don't listen, if we keep ignoring the cracks until they become chasms, Park Lane won't be the last street to burn. So tell me, where does London go from here? What needs to change? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this conversation matters more than you think. And if this report opened your eyes to what's really happening, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this video, not for us, not for views, but for every single person who deserves to know the truth about what's happening in our cities. Because what comes next will define not just London, but Britain itself. And you deserve to see it unfold without the filter. Stay informed, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next one.